also the director of the Horoscope Earth Composition and Evolution Program. Before proceeding with this presentation, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land on which Curtin University is located, and pay my respects to the elders in that community. The purpose of this webinar is to inform you about a relatively new AusGeochem project called the AusGeochem Geochemistry Laboratory Network, or AGN for short. We hope by the end of this presentation, you will be better informed about what our vision is for improved collaboration in the geochemistry community, how we are building a platform to provide services to the community and support collaborative research, and that you'll be more aware of opportunities for participation in the project. Let me first start by recapping what AusGeochem is. I think we have some international visitors, and welcome to you. AusGeochem is a program of funding for national research infrastructure in Australia. This project is is aligned with AusGeochem's goal to support open access to instruments, services, and data capable of supporting national research challenges and the needs of government, industry, and academic researchers. The drivers for collaboration in geochemical research infrastructure, be it in the form of instruments, data, or samples, is important because, as we hopefully all know, geochemistry is a fundamental backbone of Australia's geoscience endeavors. The AGN project has been motivated by a number of factors to address a number of challenges faced by the community, including the cost and complexity of modern laboratory hardware and infrastructure. That places severe constraints on the available resources of an institution. There's a high demand for these resources to be deployed on repairing and maintaining the instrument, and data management certainly is not something that is easily done in a operational sense. There's a community demand for greater collaboration. We've had a number of workshops in 2018 supported by AusGeochem, and where we had, particularly amongst the early and mid-career researchers, a greater demand for collaboration so they would have improved understanding of opportunities and mobility within the community. Challenges, we have a lot of challenges with data. Modern analytical instruments are producing unprecedented volumes of geochemistry data. As an example, a PhD student today is likely to be able to generate as much data in a single day on a triple-streamed laser ablation system than people of my generation were able to do within their entire PhD study. And what has happened in terms of data management, it's lagged far behind. In my generation, we used floppy disks. That was replaced by thumb drives. And now thumb drives are replaced by Dropbox. But in essence, they're the same thing. They're not collaborative data infrastructure. There are also a number of national priorities. If you attended Geoscience Australia's presentation yesterday on exploring for the future, you would have seen that isotopic mapping of craton boundaries is having a greater importance, identifying priority areas for targeting mineral exploration. And doing this activity on a national scale will depend upon a greater degree of collaboration between geosurveys and analytical laboratories. And finally, legacy collections. Many of us will know that when somebody retires in an institution, it's very difficult to keep those samples preserved. And it's the duty of the community in many cases to help preserve these nationally important samples and data collections. And it's best to do that through a project like a collaborative geochemistry project. Other drivers, obviously, we're seeing greater regulations and compliance from funding agencies in terms of archiving samples and data, and as well as the academic publishing community, to make sure that data is fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. And there's also new opportunities in terms of leveraging e-research infrastructure. There's a very large community out there who think about data on a regular basis. And by organizing ourselves, we are much able to tap into that, into that community. So the project, in essence, was rolled into all of those motivational factors to establish a national collaborative network of geochemistry laboratories. So what are we trying to achieve? What are the activities that we're hoping to do? Well, we're hoping to promote the existing geochemical infrastructure across the nation. We want to make sure everybody knows where it is, how to find it, how old it is, what services are available. We want to promote investment in new advanced geochemical infrastructure, and this is getting more and more expensive, as many of you know. So we're not always going to be able to have a new instrument in every university. Sometimes we could maybe look for ways of cooperating on purchasing new infrastructure. We want to support Australian participation in the open data environment. We want to support the early and mid-career researchers in their professional development, as well as graduate students, by providing online tools, training courses, and workshops. We also want to make sure that the end user community, and by this I mean industry and government, they know how to access and where to access laboratory field facilities. Preserving legacy data sets, as I mentioned before, it will be a priority. And what we're doing in the AGN as a sort of a centerpiece of activity is that we've started the development of a central repository for multiple isotopic data sets called AusGeochem. The Agn Project Team, we have a number of different groups involved. We have the leadership team, both in terms of the headquarters, the Horoscope headquarters, Tim Rawling, Tanya Down, and Joe Connon. We have the senior leaders, Sue O'Reilly, Andy Gletto, who agreed to work with me on organizing this, this project and bringing in a number of domain experts, not only in geochemistry, but also in data infrastructure. And by way of that, I'll introduce the Lithodat group, Fabian Kohlmann and Wayne Noble and Moritz Thiel, who are helping us. They're the golden unicorns of the world. They're helping us to understand how best to make our data publicly available. And we've got a number of new data scientists coming on stream. And two of them today will be making part of this presentation. So Dr. Alexander Prent is the AGN coordinator. He's working at Curtin as a postdoctoral fellow. Samuel Boone is a postdoctoral fellow at University of Melbourne, and he's a data scientist there. And as well, we'll have Fabian Kohlmann talking about the Lithodat AGN platform and how it works. So sorry, just to go back. So in these boxes here in yellow, we want to make sure that everybody realizes that this is just the start. We're hoping that this will grow, that the community will grow, that will bring in more institutions, will bring in more research laboratories. And we don't see any limits on that growth. The vision here is to use the analogy or the metaphor of the astronomers who are widely credited as being true collaborators, because they're working on very large problems and they need very large telescopes to see the deepest parts of the universe. We are the same, only our instruments are downward-looking telescopes, and we are needing to understand how the Earth works, how Australian mineral resources and petroleum energy resources are operating and where they can be found. And a lot of this will require cooperation of many different institutions. And this builds on many years of collaboration in the community through an organization such as Tango. There's two images there of Perth and the Melbourne Tango meetings, where we've had a great set of cooperative projects being discussed by the research community. So we're starting off at a very early stage with the AusGeochem data platform. This is just an example of some of the work that we've been doing to preserve the collection of Professor Neil McNaughton, who's recently retired from Curtin University. And this is a collection of shrimp uranium lead data. But there'll be a lot more discussion on this and the vision of what we're trying to do, provided by Dr. Sam Boone at University of Melbourne. Sam, I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Brent, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll just share my screen now. And can everyone see that? Is that look good?
Yes.
Okay. So as geochemists and members of geochemistry laboratories, or perhaps you work with geochemistry data, our jobs center around the production of geochemistry data and utilizing those data to make inferences about the evolution of our planet and how it operates. And I'm sure, as you're all aware, the journey from obtaining a geological specimen and producing raw data to curating data in a form that's ready for public digestion is a long one. And one way we can look at this data curation continuum is by this 3-domain model, whereby we produce geochemistry data at institutions within geochemistry laboratories. And you might want to share those data with your colleagues and collaborators in other laboratories to produce novel and innovative science. But in order to do that, it requires some level of data curation, making sure that data is in a form that's readily accessible and interpretable by your colleagues. And this might involve some level of calculation. You might need to synthesize those data in plots or figures. And then you need to disseminate it in some way. And this could be digitally via, say, Cloud Store or Dropbox, or perhaps this is actually physically handing someone a flash drive. Now, once you and your colleagues are happy with the data that you've curated and you're ready to share your science with the general public in the publication domain, this again requires yet more curation and migration. You might want to mine previously reported data to see how your data fits in the context of what's come before you. You might want to then do more calculations, more data synthesis, producing more plots and figures. And then what's becoming increasingly common is you then need to publish those data in a data repository in compliance with the data reporting requirements of your funding agency or agencies, or perhaps the journal that you're publishing in. And during this migration process and curation process, your data goes through a number of transformations. It generally becomes more structured. It obtains more metadata. It becomes more widely accessible to a wider community, and it becomes better preserved. But simultaneously, those data actually lose resolution. By the time you're presenting data in the public domain, you're generally only presenting a refined subset of all of the data that you've produced way back in the institutional domain. And actually, a lot of data is lost that we produce in our laboratories along this way, some of which, even though they might be very important from a scientific point of view, they may never see the light of day. And in addition, your data may generally lose its flexibility as it, once it goes into these repositories, it becomes increasingly more difficult to then refine those values if need be. And it's important to note that along this data curation continuum, when your data goes through these multiple phases of curation and migration, these are still primarily manual operations. We, as members of these laboratories, have to perform this curation and migration multiple times. Well, it's our goal at the AGN, and with the help of Lithodat, to provide a research tool and a data archiving tool, which we call AusGeochem, to the Australian geochemistry community. The idea being that this tool will allow us to improve our data management system within our community and thus streamline the data handling process, reducing the amount of times we actually need to manually curate and migrate these data between these different domains. And in doing so, we want to simultaneously transition the Australian geochemistry data ecosystem to a more fair one, meaning that our data is more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And by improving this data curation continuum across the Australian geochemistry community, we believe that this will also make geoscience produced in Australia more visible to the wider world. So the way that we envision the AusGeochem platform facilitating the data refinement and archiving process is something like this. So you return back from the field perhaps, and you bring a sample back to your lab, or someone, maybe a colleague, sends you a sample, and already we can start cataloging some of those details into the AusGeochem database. This could be things like coordinates, lithology information, mineralogy, these sorts of things. And if you so choose, people also using AusGeochem can already see, hey, there's samples collected from these various regions. There'll be contact information if they choose, hey, we'd like to do some more analyses on these rocks. Perhaps we can collaborate with this particular researcher or research team. While importing these data, you'll also be simultaneously minting your samples, which means that they'll get IGSNs, or International Geosample Numbers. And these are unique alphanumeric codes, meaning that this will help us reduce duplication and redundancies within our database and other data repositories. So you may then take those data and do some analyses within your geochemistry laboratory and produce some raw data. These could be raw counts off your mass spectrometer, or these could be digital micrographs if you're doing image analyses. And then you would most likely do some first level of interpolation or data reduction within your lab to produce what we're calling here hard data. And these could be isotopic concentrations, or they could be ways in which you've quantified images so that you can then calculate ages, say. And it's these hard data that we're interested in collecting in the AusGeochem database. Now, there's multiple ways you can upload those data. The most, straightforward way would be to use the built-in user interface that Lithodat is building within the AusGeochem database. Or perhaps more in a more sophisticated manner, which would be taking advantage of AusGeochem's open API, meaning that you as a lab could write your own script in the language that you're most comfortable with to communicate between the machines that are producing your data, so your mass spectrometer, and they can upload those data in an automated fashion into the AusGeochem database, reducing the amount of times you have to handle your data. So there's a number of data models that we are currently working on. Brent mentioned the shrimp uranium lead model that we've built using the McNaughton collection as the first of a couple different data models we've tested it on. We're also currently working on a number of data models for various laser ablation, geochronology, and isotope geochemistry techniques, such as uranium lead and lutetium hafnium, with ideas of expanding later on to rubidium, strontium, samarium, neodymium. We're also currently working on an argon-argon model, as well as fission track, uranium, thorium, helium, and trace element geochemistry, with more to come. So once these models are stable, it's our intention to then expand those to then yet further and further geochemistry systems. It's also important to note that when we're capturing these data, we're also capturing funding information about the sources of the funding that allowed us to collect these materials and produce these analyses. Now, once all of this hard data is in AusGeochem, we have all the tools required to actually start making calculations and producing process data like calculated ages, or do statistical interpretations. And by building the models in the way that we are, so that different equations and things sit within the AusGeochem database, it means that you can calculate these ages within AusGeochem. And this is great because it allows us to level the data produced by different labs that could have been produced at different times, or perhaps reported in different manners. Perhaps parameters change in the future as well. We have better or more precise determinations of constants or new diffusion models. Well, this will allow us to basically recalculate your data as well as data in the database using the diffusion models or the constants of your choosing, making sure that we're comparing apples with apples. say. Another important aspect of the AusGeochem database is its privacy control settings. So you can choose to keep your data private so that only people in your laboratory can see them. You can make them completely public, or you can take an intermediate road, which basically you get to select collaborators or colleagues of your choosing to be able to see those data without the wider public being able to see them. You can then give access to those colleagues or collaborators to those data sets, and then they can export those data, and basically this allows you to disseminate data through the AusGeochem platform. When you're ready to make those data public, you can then publish those data as DOIs of those data sets. And this would be in compliance with the data reporting requirements of funding agencies and journals. Once those data are in the database, you can then view it in the context of what data exists from your area of interest. You can then produce on-the-fly synthetic plots, such as perhaps scatter plots or Kara-Wasserbergs if you're interested in certain geochronological techniques, or histograms, as well as derivative maps such as heat maps for age or other variables of your choosing. And importantly, this is all while retaining your privacy control, meaning that if you're working on a project and you're not ready for for publication, say, you can still use these functionalities within AusGeochem while maintaining data privacy. And then when you're ready, you can export the data that you need, either by selecting the individual samples. You can filter those data so that you're only taking the fields that you require. And we're designing these data models in a way that you can extract those data in a number of formats to make them more readily usable. So this could be CSV or KMZ files, say, for sample locations and sample information, PDFs and PNGs for different plots and images and maps that you produce within AusGeochem. And then we're working with expert advisory groups for specific methods, and they can advise us on program-specific files that are important for their community. So for instance, for the low temperature thermochronology community, we often use programs to model the thermoevolution of samples based on our data, such as using the programs QTQT and Hefty that I've listed here. So for instance, it'll be important that we can extract those types of data in those formats so that they're ready to be plugged into the softwares, and we can do thermal history modeling straight away. So with one tool, we're able to archive our data. We can streamline the upload using our open API and user-defined scripts. We can mint those samples. We can do statistical analyses within AusGeochem of those data. We can retain privacy, disseminate those data to colleagues. We can publish those data sets as DOIs, and we can mine existing data from the database, synthesize and visualize those data and our data, and then export those data and plots that we have made while only handling your data once. And to tell you a bit more about how we're actually going about building the AusGeochem platform, I'll hand you over to Dr. Alex Prent from Curtin University. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That's great. I'll carry on with our presentation here. And it's important to realize that this is the AGN vision of the AusGeochem platform. And in order to realize that vision of creating a general AusGeochem platform that is simple to use and allows for functionality, the collaboration with Australian geochemistry laboratories is essential, as is a solid foundation for such platform, and that requires us to organize and then build on that foundation. So organization is really organization of geochemical data is cornered, or the cornerstone of that geochemistry data is basically the sample. And the sample should be well described. So we sat together with the team and discussed what was needed to describe a sample in a good way. And together with the some help of Geological Survey and Lithodat and the partners of the AGN, we came to basically these couple of fields and a metadata template for the description of samples. And important is, where does it come from? And as everybody would know, you can collect a GPS location, and depending on that resolution, you have a square of 1 meter or 10 meter, and in that square you can encounter multiple rock types. So the lithology, the description of the lithology is important. So we developed a metadata template that is easy to use, has these lists where you can choose from a variety of lithologies. I think there's about 1,200 different sorts, but if you type the first letter of the lithology, it will select that. And accompanied with that, it's important to record where the sample is last archived, or where can we retrieve the sample in order to make sampling efforts more efficient and effective. So if you know that a sample was collected in the Kimberley and you want to have access to that sample, you can basically ask and look up where you can get this sample from, which will really stimulate collaboration and will minimize the duplication of efforts, maximizing the input of funding and the output or the results of research funds. So then associated with that is the grant ID number. So you can add your grant ID and the funding body that made it possible to sample. And that will help satisfy some of the, for example, ARC requirements, which can help in future grant applications. Now, the AGN is there to provide advice on such things, so how to report sample metadata. And as Sam already mentioned, we're working with a variety of people in expert advisory groups to organize the analytical data. So as we've collected a sample, we'll subject that to a variety of geochemical techniques. And those data from those techniques should be reported in a fairly standardized way, at least should share many fields, basic fields that describe the analytical data set well, and at the same time allow for flexibility that is needed to be original and is needed to actually produce our research. So we've asked the fission track experts, the argon experts, the hafnium uranium lead experts to advise the AGN on what is good metadata practice. And of course, there is international efforts there, which are very important. And we're trying to incorporate as much as we can from the recent papers that have come out. For example, the Cheyenne et al. Paper of 2 weeks ago that advises on how to report argon-argon, and the Horstwood et al. Paper to report uranium-lead geochronology data. So in these advisory groups, Fission Track Group, there's Sam, Martin, Stein, and Renji, and Barry. And in the Argon group, there's Erin, Hayden, Marnie, Davud, Paolo, David, and Fred. And in the hafnium, so for those two groups, that basically incorporates all of the Australian laboratories producing fission track and argon data. Now for the hafnium uranium lead group, we've chosen to keep it fairly consolidated. And as soon as we have a metadata template that we agree on in that group, we want to put this to the larger community and present what's in there. So everybody can have a say and everybody is happy to contribute in that way, because that's paramount. If we want to produce a standardized way, everybody should be willing to populate that database. So we've done this with the uranium-lead shrimp data, and I forget here that the metal isotope group has volunteered to set up ways in the metal isotopes laboratories in Australia, and Jurai and Lucy, Anthony and Oliver and Brandon, they've provided me recently with a template from the international community, which is fantastic. So that is something we're working on in the AGN, and what we've done with the GSWA, GA and the AGN, we've taken donated shrimp data set that was a legacy of Professor Neil McNaughton that Brent already mentioned. And we've used that data set to make a uranium-lead shrimp data model. And as you can see, that is then used on the AusGeochem platform to populate it and provide some preliminary analytics. And that was done in collaboration and based on the international advice from Horstwood and GSWA and GA and cells and Lithodat. Now, that sounds all pretty, maybe for some that sounds pretty daunting. If one metadata template is needed, and from our analytical results, we all know that often multiple CSV files result. If we need to aggregate that into a common template, we're aiming to provide a service to the community in the form of a little bit of script, say 10, 12 lines of Python code that aggregates multiple CSV files into an organized way. And that's then stored into the AusGeochem database and can be interrogated, interacted with on the AusGeochem platform. And to build that platform, we've asked the Lithodat team under helm of Dr. Fabian Kohlmann to the database as easy as possible. And Fabian will lead us into a little bit more detail of developing the AusGeochem platform. So Fabian, I'll give it to you.
Okay, thanks Alex. Let me share my screen. Okay, let me start a bit. I will show a bit where we are at the moment with the AusGeochem platform development. And I think before I begin, I will give you all a bit of a brief introduction of who actually Lithodat is and who we are. So Lithodat, we were founded in 2018 here in Melbourne. We are a geoscience data software company. We consist of, currently we have around 7 employees. And we're coming mainly from the hydrocarbon industry background, but also some of our software engineers coming from the banking and the retail industry. So we have a really strong background in database structuring and geoscience compilation. So what we mainly do is we collate data from the public domain.
Sorry, Fabian, can you share your screen?
Oh, can't you see? Oh, sorry.
Am I the only one? Or?
Okay, wait. Let me try again.
Yes, that works. Thank you.
That works. Sorry. Okay. You haven't missed much yet, so that's where I am. Yeah, so what we do, we collate data from the public domain. We digitize it if it comes from some graphs. We extract it from tables. We make sure it's all QC'd and cleaned and really structured and standardized, so to fit all in our one relational database. Once we have it all structured and sitting in one database, so then that enables it then to interact with each other. So all kind of dispersed data sets, once you have them in a format that they can talk to each other, that's where the magic happens, and you can start creating new products, doing analytics on the fly. So that's the main concept of what we are doing. That's why it's so important having these integrated data sets. And as I mentioned, we put all in one large standardized relational database where we have then all these different data types shared across different tables. And it's very important to have a future-proof design for this whole data structure, where we can add any kind of data type later on, and we can expand this data. So for the AusGeochem platform, it doesn't mean we have to stop where we are at the moment. We can add any kind of isotopic system later on. What is very important for us is that we capture the locations accurate. So every data point should have a location, as you need to know where your sample comes from. If you don't know where it's from, it doesn't tell you a lot, and it loses a lot of its worth. You don't need to store in databases all the regions, basins, countries where you are. A lot of that can be auto-populated. So you can store space, can save space on it. But we also capture all the lithology, for example, depths from where the samples come from, the stratigraphic ages. And we also try to capture elevation, where each sample has been taken from, which is not always given. But if it's not given, it's no problem, because we are applying some APIs where we can then extract based on the location elevation. So we make sure every sample which is stored in our database has an elevation assigned, if it comes from the surface or if it comes from a well. If the depth is given, obviously we need to store that information, but it has to be provided. And yeah, all labs and even the researchers who have done the analysis, all of that is stored, and every single point has a reference attached to where it comes from. To give you a quick overview of the technology stack we're using, so for our front end, which we have coded and developed, we're using React and Spring Boot for the back end, and all our data is stored in a PostgreSQL database. It's built via Git and a two-stage Amazon Web Service pipeline, and it's all running in our AWS Elastic Beanstalk cloud setup. So to show you a bit now about the Horoscope Geochemistry platform, where we are working together with the Agn team. So the main goal of this collaboration between the Horoscope Geochemistry laboratory network and Lithodat is to connect all contributing labs and institutes of the Agn digitally. So each member will be able to log into a web platform and can execute these following tasks. So for example, they can contribute data, you can enter the data either via forms, or we can use APIs to connect directly to the machine, so they can directly upload data into the database. IGSN minting can be automated, as Sam already showed before in his presentation. The data, very important, what we want to do is that the data can be reviewed. So all data which been entered can be QA/QC'd, even in internal review process. Per lab can approve the data before it goes out, then someone in the Agn lab work can approve that data before we put it out in the public. On top of that, of course, you have all this privacy control where you can keep data private, or you can share it then with the public if you want to. That's all part of the managing data, where you can publish it and you can structure and archive all of your data. And we can even then stream that data from our platform using some web map services or web feature services, and feed them into other existing portals, such as the new Geoscience Australia portal, or the existing Horoscope Discovery portal, to show the locations as well. You won't have all the functionality and the access control and privacy control. That's what you have within the Horoscope and Geochem platform. And then all the utilizing that data, where you can search and filter the data, you not only within one data type, because it's structured within one relation database and standard types, that enables you to search and filter across all data types at once, and it enables you to do more spatial analytics, and then you can download the data and export it in data types you want. Yeah, the main thing is that we can connect as many labs here in Australia as possible. They can join different teams, different isotopic systems, and we can share all the data via the AusGeochem platform. And again, as I mentioned, there's the main difference between existing portals, that's the USGS data portal and a platform, is that in a portal, it does a great job usually in collating data and showing where data is. If you want to get a brief, quick overview of what's available, you can look on those platforms which present all these WMS, WFS feeds. The problem is each feed comes with a different data structure and different fields, sometimes the same fields, but with different names. So you can't do analytics or analyze data or filter data across all data types. So the advantage within a platform where we have all the data standardized and sitting in one database, that enables you then to do all these cross data analytics, plus you can give full access rights and privacy control within one database. So that makes it special, and that's different in a platform architecture compared to portals. So the main difference, as I mentioned, is that then all laboratories will be able to connect directly to the platform and upload their data sets into there, or you can delete them. You have control of your data. You can manipulate your own data in that platform. You have full privacy control over the data sets. Yeah, it's a big time saving if you search for other data which other labs has produced in some regions of Australia, but not only looking in one data type, you can look across dispersed data types at the same time. You can then also do this on the fly generations of graphs and simple export functions of all the selected data, including live analytics. And as Sam already mentioned a bit, you can do recalculation of relevant parameters. For example, if a parameter changes because there have been made some new discoveries, we can on the fly recalculate all ages for one type, for example, and it will be displayed and analyzed straight away within new values. And we will have this open REST API, which enable external users to plug in directly into our platform and then develop their own analytical tools where it takes the data, or you can even hook up then the machines and then feed in data directly into the platform. And the main thing what we all aim for is that we have a very easy and user-friendly front end, so it's understandable and not complicated to use. So to show you a bit about the power of this sharing, what Sam already mentioned a bit is, for example, you have a researcher, you have a PhD student who has data, but it's not published yet, as he just generated it, but he wants to see how his data sits within existing data. So he can upload it already to the AusGeochem platform, but then he can already start comparing it with existing data sets. He can create graphs for his thesis, for example, or for publication using the existing data, but no one else can access his data unless he makes it public. But if he wants to discuss it, let's say with his supervisor, he can give extra access rights to his supervisor so he can see his data, they can discuss the data, he can share data back with him, and let's say his supervisor has a lot of publications already and he has the data is freely and he can upload all. In the meantime, all of them have the same full access to all data which is already on the AusGeochem platform. Other researchers from different institutes have the same, they can share data with some special collaborators they want to, but on the other hand, they can also share it with the whole community. And that one, for example, has also some data which he wants to keep private for now, but he wants to see how it fits. So you can keep part of your data private. So you have full control of your data. That's the strength of that AusGeochem platform, which we developed. Plus, we can implement existing data infrastructure. For example, labs who host very large data sets where you have a lot of images, let's say, of mounts taken or of scanned, let's say, the fission track grains, which can be terabytes of data. And let's say they are stored in using cloud store, existing ARNet infrastructure. we can link those images and directly to the samples and to each mount which has an ID already stored in our system. So you can then connect it to those existing storages and you can view those images. So the data model we use, it's based partly, of course, on our Lithodat data model, but we modified and adjusted it to fit the AusGeochem platform's needs. The basement is kind of, we have the model for all the ownership and access control. So all data which is uploaded is stored within data packages. On top of that is then sitting the Lithodat core model, and in the core model we store all essential entities like samples, the mineral types, the literature. And then based on these, connected to these data points, we have all the different data types, which is specific. Each data type has a specific model, let's say the shrimp or wet data, or for fission track, or for argon, or for lithium, hafnium. And each of those sets have their own data model with their own fields. And all these parameters which we store in tables, we store in there, are worked out together with the expert groups Alex just introduced before. And another nice thing is then we're using these statement models. That's where we can do advanced analytics on the fly and still keep a very high speed within the system, where you analyze the data on the fly across all data sets. That makes it really powerful tool to use. And the thing which is very special, what I mentioned as well, is we are offering these open REST application programming interface, the API for AusGeochem Platform, which connects the AusGeochem Platform to different machines or for upload. So as you can see, the AusGeochem Platform is a browser-based client, and clients can be different computers or applications you're running, which are connecting then via cloud or the internet to servers. And all of that, the connection is done via our REST API. And an API, you can imagine it's like a waiter in a restaurant, where you are going to the restaurant, you order something, you want to view some data. The API is the waiter going to the kitchen. You're not allowed to the kitchen, so he has only access to the kitchen, gets you the right dish you ordered, is being prepared for you, and he returns it to you. So that's what an API is essentially doing. The nice thing with that API is, as I said, you can use it to develop your own statistics, or you can hook up your own machines. And it doesn't matter what language you use. You can use the programming language you are used to use, let it be Python, C++, C#, Java. You can create your clients and hook them up to the API, and that's open for everyone. So I'll show you a bit about some planned AusGeochem platform functionality, which we want to get functioning in the next few months. So we have a login page where you land, you can register, you log in, you get access to the platform. You can then query data points. You click on a point, you get already the basic information to get a quick feeling and understanding of the data. You have a multi-selection tool where you can select more points on the fly. You create graphs. For example, you can do a histogram, H histogram on the fly, but these graphs are not even fixed, they're flexible. For example, the histogram, you can even adjust the bin size, so you can make your bins wider or smaller. You can see all the data then in tables. In the tables, you can sort, you just click on each field, and you can sort alphabetically or by value. You can rearrange fields. You can even get more data, like all the metadata which is stored if you want to. All is downloadable with a download button in all different download formats. And then we thought about, we want to create these dashboards for each system. In the dashboards, you will have still a table with your data, but then you have all these different graphs, and you can, if you want a different graph, you can select a different type of graph, so you can replace them. The graphs are still, most of them will be interactive, as you can see on the one on the side, where you can adjust, for example, the range of your y-axis. And that will make it a really powerful tool just to quickly visualize your data as well, besides just downloading it. So that's where we want to go. And I hope that gave you a quick overview where we are now and where we are going. So thanks. Back to Brent.
Thank you, Fabian. That was excellent. So I think we're at the end point of the seminar. Just have one more slide or two to share with you. And it's the summary slide. So hopefully now that you've seen the drivers and the motivation for the project and the need for improved collaboration in the community, you will see that there's scope for increased collaboration. This is not an exclusive club. We're very much wanting to be inclusive. We want to bring in new data sets. We want to bring in new ideas. The activities and objectives, we've only really covered the key AusGeochem platform, but there's many other activities that we're planning. We're gathering data on instrumentation around the country, on services available around the country for end users. The AusGeochem platform, we intend to release that by the end of the year with basic functionality. And so, yeah, you'll have to wait a little bit while longer, but it still doesn't prevent you from becoming involved in the activities. We want to make sure everybody's updated, so we want to provide a regular webinar series led by the data scientists in the community. We're proposing to have that on a monthly basis, and so you'll be able to monitor where we're at. So we're definitely interested in your feedback and your participation. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I've got one, Brent. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. The question is pretty much about the data quality assurance, because we can, of course, gather a lot of data, but we, of course, don't know how good the data is. And then if we just put it in a database and make it widely available, people tend to then take the data and plot them up. But we of course, need to make sure that we have something in there that we all know has the same quality to some degree. And it starts with raw data, which may have a bias, and then we have data that is based on standards. So obviously, this is a fantastic start, and it's always easy to criticize, right? But I think it's very important that we give this some thought, that at least we make a round robin of standards, or have at least a section in there where we have, let's say, accredited labs that just put their standards in there, where we can see what we're dealing with. I mean, that I think is something we want to think about.
Absolutely. That's come up in many of our discussions, and this is a concern raised in the expert advisory groups. And clearly, there's a limit to what you can do in terms of quality control, assuring quality control in a system like this. But as you said, the round robins that are currently running in the international community, and round robins which we can ourselves drive, are well worth doing.
I'll also just have a comment, Brent, in response to Oliver's question. It's a really good point. And as Brent said, within the various expert advisory groups, we're discussing how exactly we can best assure quality data, or at least allow users of the platform to be able to do their own quality assessment. And solutions that we're coming up with include basically with any unknown or data that you're providing for unknown specimen, you're also providing reference material analyses, for instance, and things like that. So that within the data model, if you are interested in a certain data point or a range of data points, you can then see the associated reference material results. And then you can choose if you want to use it or not. And then the data is there for your use.
Yeah, and I suppose with that is the consideration of what data to include. Do you wish to? We discussed that in the expert advisory groups as well, and something that we think everybody can agree on is to not include the raw mass spectrometry data, but to trust the first order data reduction that results in isotopic ratios, for example. And that is a quality control step of the laboratory itself, right? And with the inclusion of reference material values, every user can then assure themselves of the quality of data. But it's certainly something that in the next presentations and with the presentation of metadata templates should be addressed in the community, I think.
Thanks, Oliver, for the question. Anyone else?
I have a question. It's Rebecca, but it's not directly related to geochemistry. So if there's anyone else ahead of me, they should go.
Please go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, yeah, I was just, I suppose just as a query, as an AusGeochem insider, but a geochemistry outsider, how much did you leverage off what's going on internationally in the international communities or in the broader NCRIS communities? So I know, biodiversity and or in the Urban Research Infrastructure Network, they have also, I suppose, these kind of digitally enabled platforms for people to upload and analyze their data that have this geospatial component that's obviously really important for geochemistry. Were you able to leverage any of those communities' knowledge or experience into this? And if so, what?
Yeah, I'm happy to let you know that we've been working with the Australian Research Data Commons and its predecessor for several years in data management. And so in terms of how best to organize geochemical data and mineralogical data, we are talking to sort of the key groups. Of course, AusGeochem itself has very strong capability in data platforms. The AusGeochem Discovery Portal and the work that Jens Klump's team is doing now and Ryan Fraser's team beforehand. That's certainly an area where we did some early development work and posted a lot of geochemical data, including shrimp uranium lead data. So in terms of the ORAN platform and the other platforms that are available, of course, GA has a fantastic new platform out too. I think the reality is that these platforms are becoming more common, and it's not that there only needs to be one platform or one portal. It's more that the portal needs to suit the needs of the community that it's addressing. And that's why we've chosen to go down the road of creating our own platform with support from Lithodat. So I don't know if that addresses your question enough. We are aware that there are other platforms out there, but we want to make sure that ours is tailored to the needs of the community.
No, that's good. I think that's a good point you make about making sure that it meets the needs of whoever it is that's going to be accessing the data and using it. Yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other inquiries?
Brent, actually here from Adelaide, that begs another question. Where do you think is the boundary of your platform? I mean, what was presented was mainly, let's call it hard rock data. As you know, I'm working on fluids. Would you include that, or?
It really depends on community demand and the sustainability of that community. I don't see why there's any need to limit it to the fluids, gases, air. As long as it can be geospatially located, we can work out the metadata that needs to be acquired and upload it to the platform. Certainly, there's great opportunities here to also link it in with other platforms, such as Rebecca suggested. It's There's nothing limiting us from doing that. It's just about the need and the demand and the cost and whether we can sustain it. That's a key issue that I'm concerned about, is sustainability. But if there's an active fluids, noble gas community, we'd very much welcome you.
Could I make a comment, Brent? Andy Gletto here. I've taken the view since the beginning of this program that, I mean, we've got to look at the context that we sit within. We're part of NCRIS, which is, our job is to produce research infrastructure that is useful to researchers and part of what they do. And that's very different to some of the other data compilations that are out there, which are essentially, I mean, some of them are fantastic. You've mentioned the GA one, which is extraordinarily comprehensive, covers all sorts of different kinds of data types, and Jeff Fraser might want to talk about that. But it's a different role. Our job is to provide something that really is useful and valuable to researchers, and that, to my mind, is not just the data. The data are vital, but my vision for this has always been that we should have a platform here that becomes a vital part of our research workflow that we as researchers actually use. It's the way we do our data reductions. It's the way we handle our data, so that we have that benefit of this as a research tool in the way we do things. And that's somewhat different to the large-scale national data compilations that GA, other surveys, for example, are producing, and they're aimed at a different audience and a different purpose. And what we're doing, I've always seen as extremely complementary to that, and will feed into that kind of activity. But fundamentally, our job is to produce infrastructure for the researchers that they will use. And if we can do that, if we can engage all of us in that process, so that we actually we make this as part of our research workflow, then the data compilation part becomes completely automated. It'll always be there. It'll be collected. The legacy data collections that labs that have been around a long time have is a separate issue, but a lot of that is already collated in some form or another, and we're already, in fact, uploading that or have done that into AusGeochem. So I think we need to be clear about what our purpose is.
Thanks, Andy. I'd also want to just go back to Rebecca's question. I see we have Leslie Wyborn here, who's great inspiration to all of us. And Leslie is working with Kirsten Leonard on an international initiative called One Geochemistry, and Horoscope has certainly supported that and signed on to that. And so we also want to make sure that through the efforts of Leslie, we're able to operate internationally. And Leslie would be very happy for you to say something about what One Geochemistry is doing.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Leslie. Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, look, there's a few initiatives, embryonic initiatives going on around the world. There's one in EPOS, European Plate Observing System. EarthChem itself just got a grant for $2 million over 2 years to improve its system. Its system is recommended by Nature. And so what Kirsten and I are trying to do through the Geochemical Society, and I can't remember what the other one is, there's another geochemical, there's two of them, right? To work with those societies to actually get something that is then accepted internationally for the interchange of geochemical data. Now, how you deploy it on your platform, which is what you're doing here, is your local choice. But yeah, we're also trying to get the Chinese involved in it, but it's very, very slow. And we've been a bit naughty and we've grabbed the website onegeochemistry.org. So watch this space. But it's painful. Geochemistry data is very heterogeneous compared to geophysics and geology. We'll get there. Is that what you wanted,
Thanks.
Brent?
Thanks, Leslie. Appreciate it.